What we're adjusting is valve clearance, or the space between the cam and the valve bucket at top dead center. Too much space makes an annoying clicking noise and robs horsepower. Too little space may mean overheated or stuck valves.
Now, to do a valve adjustment correctly on your dirt bike, you're going to first need a manual. You're going to need to get the correct manual for that bike. We got that. Next thing you're going to need is a clipboard with some paper to take down some measurements. Next thing you're going to need is some special hand tools, just normal, common, everyday hand tools to get it apart. But the last and most important thing you're going to need is a feeler gauge set. What we're going to do first is we're going to get this engine at top dead center. You're going to take actually an inspection plug out on the bottom of the motor and get a T-handle and turn the motor over until in the inspection cover it says TDC or a mark or whatever the manual for that particular bike says. Now that we have the motor on top dead center, what we're going to do is take our feeler gauge and check what the clearance is, and we're going to check it between the cam lobe and the bucket. So we're going to see if this 4 thousandths fits in there, and it does. So our clearance is 4 thousandths on this. So what I'm going to do is take that clearance and I'm going to write it down for my intake. Then I'm going to go to my next valve. It's a little loose on there, so I'm going to go to the next size. And that one does fit. So this one's at 5 thousandths.
Repeat this operation on all 4 valves, recording each valve clearance. If clearances are over or under spec, it's time for new valve shims. Check your manual for the right kind of shims for your bike's valves.
First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our cam chain adjuster and loosen up the slack on it. Now we have this out, and what this is going to do is it's going to release pressure on the cam chain. We have the rod, which keeps the spring from moving. We have the spring, we have the washer, and we have the bolt. And the bolt will have a little hollow hole in it. We'll put that off to the side. Now you're going to see that the cam chain is going to have a little bit of slack in it. Now we're ready to pull that top end apart. Now we're starting here on the intake. It doesn't matter if you start intake or exhaust. Pull the cam cap off and set that aside. Notice when I pull this out, on this particular motor, we have what we call a C-ring in there. And that keeps the cam from moving back and forth. Very important not to lose this or leave it out. Let's go ahead and go to the exhaust. We got our cam cap off, and you can notice on here it says EX. That means exhaust. We have an exhaust one and we have an intake one. And just before I lose it here is my C-ring for my exhaust. Now, 2 things you're going to notice. First thing is, they're different sizes. They're not interchangeable. Second thing is, don't lose these. If they drop down in or you leave this out, the motor could lock up, and we don't want that happening. So now we have this apart. We're going to go ahead and get these cams out. There we go. You don't want to lose the cam chain down. So what we're going to do, a good rule of thumb is I'll set these cams over to the side. I'm just going to hang my T-wrench off of it. And that'll keep it tight. It won't fall off the sprocket on the bottom. If you take a peek here, though, our cams, there's 2 different cams in this. Obviously, we have an intake and exhaust. If I were to go like this, they kind of look the same. But what tells them apart is this little piece right here. This is what we call a decompression valve. What that decompression valve does is when you kickstart that bike, it bumps open the exhaust valve just a smidge so the bike can start easier. So we'll put those cams aside. What we're worried about now is our shims. Now, what happens is the shims are underneath these buckets. We're going to come back in 2 seconds here, pull those out, check the manual, and then get the correct shims back in there and button this thing up. We have the cams out. We're going to go ahead and remove the buckets. This particular application is what we call a shim under. It's shim under bucket. So I have a special tool here, right here. It's a little suction cup. What it does is pulls out the buckets. If you take a peek in here, you can see the 4 shims in there. This tool actually will even work on the shims. And what a shim is just a little piece of metal, precision metal. I shouldn't say just metal, because you don't want to grind these or tamper with them anyway. There's different thicknesses for them, and that's what's going to change your clearance out. So we're going to go ahead and put them in the spot where we wrote it on the paper. It's very important that we keep it on the paper, because what we're going to do is consult our manual, and our manual will have a little shim chart in there, and it'll tell us exactly what shims we need to replace it with.
Here's a tip. Don't rely on the size markings you may find on a valve shim. Use a vernier caliper or micrometer to make absolutely sure.
So let's get these shims back in. Make sure the numbers are down so they don't wear off. Now we're ready for our buckets. Let's put those buckets back in. It's a good idea to put a light coating of oil on the buckets. Now, with the shims in and the buckets in, we're ready to go ahead and install our cams. What you need to do is take a look at your motor and see where the cam chain tensioner is. On this particular motor, our cam chain tensioner is right here. Now, that plays an important part because you always want to set the marks on the non-tensioner side first. So it's always a good idea to put this cam in first in this particular model. This happens to be our exhaust cam. So what we're going to do here is pull our chain up. We're still on top dead center down here. This hasn't moved yet. So we're going to go ahead, get our exhaust cam in. There's going to be a little dot, and we're going to go ahead and get that dot lined up directly with the line on the case. So now we're ready for the intake cam. Our intake cam, we do the same exact thing. Slide that in. Now, the reason we do the non-tensioner side first is because if there's any slack that the tension brings up, it's going to bring this dot down. So now we got the cams on. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put our C-clips in. Very important. Don't forget those. And remember, they're different sizes. Once we set those on, we're going to take our caps, our cam caps, remember exhaust and intake. And now this is very important. On these high-performance models, you've got to be very gentle with these. If they are over-torqued or if they are put in incorrectly, you can have damage done to them. Our next step is to go ahead and put in our cam chain tensioner. First piece that goes in, our cam chain tensioner, is our spring, then our rod, and last is our nut. Now, the last bit we're going to do to this motor is put our gasket on. Now, a gasket on most models is reusable. Check your service manual, make sure that's true. Next will be our valve cover. Now, if this motor